Man, I love that song, but Heaven's Full of Sinners. But I'm telling you, that's what some of you were. But you've been washed, you've been clean, you've been by the blood of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's what's been done for us, so that they were sinners, they were those things. Yeah, we struggle on this earth and we struggle with sin, but that's the accusations that continue to um, be put in front of by the accuser, being put in front of God. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these end times of ending those times of where we were, and our positional it will be changed. I believe in what's called penal substitutionary atonement, where basically Christ took the penalty, like the thief on the cross. He took that penalty for other people so that we can be atoned for. So we need to be different than we were. All right. Well, welcome back. I'm Kolan Wright, and I hope you're joining me on this stream once again. And if not, you're watching it later. Again, welcome. We are doing the end time study. We are working through a structure of what the Bible talks about for the end times, the end of this age, an age that I believe that will then switch over into this millennial kingdom, then moving into an eternal kingdom, because God's promises, his promises to the church, his promises to Israel will stand. And so we're going to be looking at Daniel 12 and Daniel 7 today. We finished up with the abomination of desolation. So if we go back and we review our slides, we are in Daniel 7 and 12. And if you, so this is where we were. We were in Matthew 24. So we were doing this, and it talked about then the end will come, therefore. So we've talked about this, and we went and we looked at Daniel 11, Daniel 8 in the last session. But when Daniel 11 and 12, we ran across a phrase. So we put together this structure of based on the abomination of desolation here. So this is our pivot point, and we were able to determine this time structure. We question whether this covenant will come to pass, but these structures here and these 2,300 evenings and mornings were all clearly shown in the book of Daniel. But we keep asking, where does it attach to Revelation? And so this week, I think we're going to finally see where it attaches to the book of Revelation. So we're going back into, so we looked at, this is another way to look at these events. Here's the 2,300, here's the 1335. But Matthew gives us this structure right here. Gives us this structure. Gives us the abomination of desolation, something we call the Great Tribulation, sign in the sun, moon, and stars, Son of Man coming, and then gathering his elect. And as we were studying the overall structure, when we were studying the structure of Luke 21 and the time, we came across this days of vengeance, and this time that threw over into this area. So that's kind of what we've kind of wrestled with and come up with. That's where we've been. So where are we going? Where are we going? We're going into Daniel 12:7. Let's go back in and let's look at our scripture references and take a look here. So Daniel 12:7. I think I need to um, make this a little bit larger. Forgive me a second. Let's make that a little bit larger. There we go. All right. So a little bit larger. So hopefully people can read that up on the screen. And as you notice down here in the bottom, I have changed my Bible that I'm using. I had been using the NASB, but as I've been doing more of the end time study, I just didn't like the way the NASB was always translating words. Sometimes they were inconsistent. I think this is the Lexham English Bible. This is the one that's primarily used through the Logos software. And so I'm going to use that one as I'm going to read through that one going forward. I might switch again. I might go to the ESV or the New King James. There's many translations I'm very pleased with. But let's go back. All right. So Daniel 12:1. Just kind of so we read this in context and everybody get back to where we can kind of agree on everything. Now, at that time, Michael, the great prince, will arise, the protector over your sons of your people, and it will be a time of distress that has not been since you have been a nation until that time. And boom, 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 boom. And at that time, your people will escape, everyone who is found written in the scroll. And many from those sleeping in the dust of the ground will awake, some to everlasting life, and some to disgrace and everlasting contempt. But the ones who have insight will shine like the brightness of the expanse, providing justice for the many, and will be like stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal the scroll until the time of the end. And many will run back and forth, knowledge will increase. Then we'll skip down to verse 6. Then he said to him, the man who was clothed in linen, who was above the water of the stream, how long until the end of the wonders? Boom. And verse 7. And I heard the man who was clothed in linen, who was above the water of the stream, and he raised his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever that an appointed time, appointed times, and half. And you can see that in italics here. That means that those words are actually not in the scripture. They're adding it for context to help people understand a little bit better. So it actually says appointed time, appointed times, and half. And then we say an appointed time would pass, that the shattering of the power of the holy people would be completed. Then all these things will be accomplished. And then what we had read from before, we had come down here because we had been in the abomination of desolation, and we had been down in verse 11. And from that time of the regular burnt offering is removed, that's the tamid, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up. And we learned that, and to the setting up of that the abomination of desolation, there'll be 1,290 days. So that's where we get that overall structure. When we went back up in here, that's where we got this, that this was from and to this, from the tamid to the abomination of desolation. Okay, so that brings us back to Daniel 12:7. So I said we were going to set that aside. We went back and we looked at all the abominations, mentioned the time, times, and half time. They asked how long. We're trying to understand, and so they mentioned this times. However, this is a interesting translation. It's a very interesting words that we're using here. So in the different versions here, and it's kind of small on the screen, the word translated time is actually this word moed, which just means appointed time. And as we looked at last time, this word moed, and we'll look at it again, actually is not just plain time. This is the only time that many translations translate it as time. Most people translate it as appointed time. But in the ESV, it is a time, times, and half a time. In the NASB, it's time, times, and half a time. And same in the King James. So if we look at just the word as it's translated time, times, and half, or time and half a time, we find there's two other verses in the entire Bible where that is translated as time, times, and half a time. And we come to Daniel 7:25. And he will speak words against the Most High, and he will wear out the holy ones of the Most High. And he will attempt to change times and law, and they will be given to his hands for time, 2 times, and half a time. Now, this one says 2 times. Many translations say time, times, and half a time. Half a time. And when I do my search on the Bible software, it'll actually search every single verse. So in some, you'll find it, in some, you won't. So that's how I was able to find it, even though the LEB, the one I'm currently using, says time, 2 times, and half a time. All right. And then we also see it in Revelation 12:14. And it says, And the two wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order that she could fly into the wilderness and to her place where she is fed there for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Okay, so we have these three scripture references that talk about time, times, and half a time. And that's where this is the only three verses that you'll find in the entire Bible translated that way. So, what do we know about this word time? Well, we looked at it a little bit previously. In our study in Daniel 12:7, it is actually the word moed. And we're going to look at moed here again in just a moment. All right. So, there's a couple questions and there's a couple things that are associated with these words. We need to understand the context of what we're dealing with. In Daniel 12:7, the question is how long until the end of these wonders? So we want to know what is the end. And we looked at that word previously, this word kes, the end of something, what is how long is till the end of it. And so we get this answer of time, appointed times, and half. But in Daniel 7:25, we get something a little different. And so I want to take a moment and I want to look at the context of Daniel 7 so that we kind of understand the context of what we're dealing with. So let's switch back over to our Bible and we will click over to Daniel 7:25. And so we get this answer here, and he will speak, and he, so we have to figure out who the he is, will speak words against the Most High, and he will wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and he will attempt to change times and law, and he'll be given to his hands for a time and two times and half a time. Okay, so we get this word times here, and this word time and two times and half a time. So now let's go back up and find out who the he is. Because they're asking in Daniel 12:7 how long until the end of these wonders. But this one, the he is going to the holy people are going to be given into this person's hand. So we're going to go back up, and if we look at the whole Daniel 7, um, it's long, but I think it's instructive for those of you who aren't familiar with Daniel 7 that we at least kind of get some context. I don't think I'm going to read every single verse, but we'll at least get some context of what's going on. Many of you who are interested in prophecy are probably very familiar with Daniel 7, but let's go through and hopefully this won't be as long today. This lesson should not be as long as last time of 2 hours and 15 minutes. But let's go ahead and look at Daniel 7. So we get in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay on his bed. And then he wrote down the dream and the summary of the words as follows. So Daniel wrote this down. Daniel explained, I was looking in my vision in the night, and look, four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And if you study prophecy and you study all these other things, and people will tell you the sea indicates this kind of Gentile world, this kind of rolling the sea. So the Gentile world is being stirred up. And the four great beasts, and you understand that beasts have to do with nations and kingdoms. So four great beasts were coming from the sea, differing from one another. And the first was like a lion and had wings of an eagle. And I was watching till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up on the earth, and it was raised on its feet like a human, and a human heart was given to it. Very interesting. We're not going to discuss that today, but that's very interesting. All right. And it was raised. Oh, let's get that. And then another beast. So this is the second one, looking like a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and three tusks were in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, flesh. After this, and dominion was given to it. The night I was looking, and there was a fourth beast, terrible, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, and it was devouring, crushing, and it stamped the remainder with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns. I was considering the 10 horns. What 10 horns? This empire has 10 horns, this beast. And look, another little horn came up among them. A little tiny horn. Oh, look at the tiny horn coming. No, sorry. And three other earlier horns were rooted out before it, and there were eyes like the eyes of a human in this horn, and also its mouth was speaking boastfully. And if you remember from last week in Daniel 8, we saw that this little horn arose from this kingdom that was Javan, or probably Greece, or that coastal area, and it grew up exceedingly great. So this, when we read in Daniel 7, this was actually done before Daniel 8. So Daniel 7 and 8 seem like they might be related. Why are we talking about little horn? Are these different little horns? Probably not. These are probably the same little horn that's coming up. So it's giving you additional information with there being 10 horns that's coming up, which is before the little horn came from four. Remember, if there were four, but it actually didn't say four horns. So that's why that's important. There was actually, it rose from among that four, that group of four. But in this case, there's 10 horns. So you have to say it's the same thing. When we look at the little horn, when we look at that being, when we look at the events more, we'll discuss this a little bit more. But we're looking at structure. We're looking at timeline. So we've got to try not to get too distracted. All right. So that it had little horn arose and a mouth that was speaking boastfully. And we saw that before. All right. I continued watching till thrones were placed and the ancients of days sat. His clothing was white as snow, and his hair of his head pure wool. Throne was a flame of fires, and wheels were burning. So we get this whole picture of what's going on in the kingdom. Thrones were set up, and he continued watching, verse 11, because of the noise of the boastful words of the horn that was speaking. And then the beast was slain, its body was destroyed, and was given over to burning fire. So the beast is destroyed. Verse 12, the remainder of the beast, their dominion was taken away, but the prolongation of their life was given to them for a season and a time. You have to want to look at this word time. But those beasts, those first three beasts, they were allowed to live, and their dominion was taken away, but they were allowed to live for a season and a time. And that's very interesting. Many people want to equate these beasts to the beasts of Daniel 2 and 4 and the ones that we saw before. But I'm not completely convinced that they're the same beasts. And we'll eventually look at that. All right, so verse 12, we just finished 13. So now I continued watching in the visions of the night, and look, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. He came to the Ancient of Days and presented before him. And to him was given the dominion, glory, and kingship, that all the peoples of the nations and languages would serve him. His dominion, this son of man, son like a son of man, his dominion is a dominion without end that will not cease, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. And this kingdom language, if you really want to understand the kingdom language, go back and watch the series on the millennial kingdom to understand what this kingdom is. But we understand that this kingdom is related to Jesus, and his kingdom is a kingdom that continues to progress, and eventually his kingdom that he's given will never go away. It is an eternal kingdom that continues to grow. All right, Daniel 15, Daniel 7:15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and my head was terrified. So he was just very terrified of what just happened and everything, and the beast and the thrones. And he probably he was wondering about various questions, and he had questions he could answer or ask. So what does he ask? Excuse me, I just ate just beforehand. All right. So in verse 19, we find that I desired to make certain concerning the fourth beast that was different from all the others. So he just saw all these things. The angel just told him that the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom, and they will take possession of the kingdom forever and ever and ever. So he kind of had an idea of the one who was on the throne and the judgment and the Son of Man coming, and he was given a kingdom. And they kind of told him what was happening, but the fourth beast, that was what was on his mind. So we have this idea of the fourth beast. And remember that out of that came a little horn. So we're wondering who the he is in Daniel 7:25. We're kind of getting an idea that's probably going to be the little horn. It's going to probably be that one. All right, so this is what he was worried about. He was worried about this because with its iron teeth and its claws of bronze, and it devoured and crushed and stamped a remainder with its feet. So he was and then he also came up. He's concerning about the horn that were on its head, the 10 horns. You remember he was already considering that when the vision switched over to the Ancient of Days. And then he was wondering about the little horn that had eyes and a mouth speaking boastfully, and its appearance was larger than its companions, appearance larger. So he had continued watching, and this horn made war with the holy ones. So this little horn made war with the holy ones, and it prevailed over them. It made war and it prevailed over the holy ones until the Ancient of Days came and gave judgment to the holy ones. So the Ancient of Days came and gave judgment to the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived for the holy ones to take possession of the kingdom. So this person now answers him. He said, the one that was speaking to him said, the fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will be on the earth that will be different from all other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth, and it will trample, and it will crush it. As far as the 10 horns, from this are 10 kings that will arise. Another will arise after them. He will be different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. And he, okay, so it is this little horn, he will speak words against the Most High. And he will wear out the holy ones of the Most High. Remember, he will make war with them and overcome them. He will prevail. And he will attempt to change times. We're going to look at this word more closely, times and law. And they, the holy ones, will be given into his hand for a time and 2 times and half a time. Okay, and then we also find a little bit more. The court will sit, and his dominion, that little horn's dominion, and that beast with the 10 horns will be removed and be eradicated to be destroyed totally. So we kind of, it gives us the whole context. So when we look at Daniel 7:25, we realize that this times, 2 times, and half a time has to do with the beast. It has to do with this fourth kingdom, that the beast, and that they're going to be given in hands. The holy ones will be given into his hands for times, and half a time. Now the question is does that mean that that's the end of the wonders? That is that the same event as this? So that's the question we always have to ask. Are these the same events? Are these the same people? So how long until the end of this wonders? It makes it sound like, if we just looked at it superficially, yes, these are the same events. Because look, at the end of the times, and half a time, while the beast is prevailing, that little horn, yeah, at the end, when that happens, the beast is judged and his kingdom is taken away, and the holy ones are given a decision in victory. Sounds like the same thing. But are they? Now let's take a little closer in-depth look. So now we learn in Daniel 12:7 that our word there is moed. Now we looked at this word previously. This word is an appointed time. It's used 223 times in the English Standard Version. 140 of the times it's used at the tent of meeting. So the tent of moed, the tent of appointed time with God. And it's used as appointed time or times 51 times in the Old Testament. It's also used as festival 6 times and seasons 3 times. When we went back and looked at the use of it, we looked at Leviticus 23, and it talked about the appointed time, the moed of God meeting with his people. And we learned that the moed, these appointed times of God, were the Sabbath, were the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks that led up to Shavuot, or we call Pentecost. That we also learned that it is Yom Teruah on the 1st of Tishri, which is the blowing of trumpets, We learned that the appointed time, or one of God's appointed times, was also Yom Kippur, or the Feast of Atonement, or the Day of Atonement. And we also learned that it's Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths, right? So when God would, you'd live with booths and live in booths to remind yourself of your time in the desert. So those were God's appointed times. Those were his moed. That's what's used in Daniel 12:7, right? But in Daniel 12:7, many of them just call it a time and times. So the word there is moed, and then when it says times, it's actually moedim. So right, so that's actually the plural form of moedim. However, as we learned before, there's multiple words. When we looked at Daniel 8, we looked at this word et, and this is the most common word for time used in the Bible. In Daniel 8 through 12, it's used 14 times, and it just has to do with a time, events and particular occasions, reference to a change in time, a season, or the right time of something. But then we also get this word moed, which are appointed times, which is different than just a regular time. This moed time is an idea of meeting with God, right? The people are meeting with God. And it's used 6 times in Daniel 8 through 12. And it has to do with appointed time, designated time. We looked at that just a moment ago. Now, there's 2 other words that's really interesting. Up until Daniel 7, remember what was happening. Daniel was carried away to Babylon when the second temple was destroyed. And they lived in Babylon, and they often spoke Aramaic. They actually spoke a different language. Hebrew was their native language, and this word et and this word moed are Hebrew words. But the words used in Daniel 2 through 7 are often Aramaic words. And the same thing is the case in Daniel 7. The words for time are actually not et, and they're actually not moed. They're actually this words Adan and Zaman. So we actually get these Aramaic words that are used in Daniel 2 through 7. And Adon is used 13 times in Daniel 2 through 7, and Zaman is used 11 times in Daniel 2 through 7. Now you can see how I lined them up. I lined up Zaman over Moed and Adan over Et. And the reason I did that is because this word Adon gives you this idea of Et, and Zaman gives you kind of the idea of a Moed. They're not a one for one, because moed is a special word that God used for his people and meeting with his people. And zaman is this Aramaic word, so it's not really a one to one. But zaman usually has to do with something, a season, an occurrence, something of a set time. It's a point of time in a general sense. It's without reference to other points or a period of time as a. These definitions, this is not something I'm making up. This is Swanson Dictionary of Biblical Language with Semitic domains. And so that's for part of the Logos software that I got. So that definition comes from that place. It's not something I'm making up. So we get these words that are different than our Hebrew words. So it's going to be instructive for us to take a moment and look at these words and how they're used in context. So let's first take a look at this word Adon. And so we're going to start in Daniel 2, 8 and 9. Now the king answered and said, "Certainly, I know that you are trying to gain time, because you have seen that this matter is firmly decreed by me. For if you do not make the dream known to me, your verdict is fixed, and you have conspired to say a lying and deceitful word to me until the circumstances," that's time. So this is the word time. So this word circumstances and up here are both Adon, will change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can tell me its explanation. So this is that situation where the king of Babylon got a dream about from God, and he asked all of his ministers, "Please tell me the dream and its interpretation." And no one can find it. And they called Daniel, and Daniel says, "Well, give me a moment." And the king is basically saying, you're just trying to stall, just like all my other people. You're trying to stall. You're trying to gain time because you have seen this matter is firmly decreed by me. You want me to tell you the dream so then you can tell me the interpretation. That's what all these lying people said. You're hoping to gain time so the circumstances will change, that maybe I'll break down. He's like, no, this is firmly decreed by me. The circumstances, the time, the Adon is not going to change. You have to tell me the dream and then tell me the interpretation. I'm not telling you my dream. So that's how this word time is used here. Then we also scroll down to Daniel 2:21. So we also see it used here. Then in a vision of the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel. So God comes and tells Daniel the actual dream. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, let his name, the name of God, be blessed throughout the ages, for the wisdom and power are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. And he deposes kings and set up kings, and he gives wisdom to men. So he changes times. Okay. So that's that word, Adon. And it's also this word, Zaman. So he changes times and seasons. And if we were to go back and we were to look at Daniel 7:21, boop, 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 and we'll look at our ESV version. Bum, 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 bum. Wisdom of night. Here we go. All right. So he changes times, Adon, and seasons, Zaman. So he changes times and Zaman. So we actually get both words in Daniel 7:21. And lets us know that these are actually not the same words, that what they're doing. He changes just regular time without reference to things, and he changes appointed times. He changes seasons. Remember what happens to the summer? We have almost like an appointed time of when summer comes on. We have appointed times when the winter comes on, right? So they change. They come in their appointed times every year. So God changes times and seasons, Adon and seasons. And you could say, if you were using Hebrew, God changes Et and Moed. He's the one that does these things. Okay. So we'll change back to our lexem. So that's one reference to this word Adon. And we also get a little bit of Zaman. So let's look at one other reference. Let's look at Daniel 7:12 and 7:25. So it's actually used twice in Daniel 7. In Daniel 7:12, we said, as for the remainder of the beast, their dominion was taken away, but a prolongation of their life was given to them for a season and a time. So it was actually given to them for a season and a time. Well, we get the same thing here. We get that it was their life was given to them for a zaman and an Adon. So we get these words used together again. So these three beasts, these first three, they were given life to prolong and continue. And that's why I don't think that these beasts are the same as the statue that we got in Daniel 2. Remember that of the different times of the different Babylon being the gold head, and then Medo-Persia being the silver, right? Those kingdoms faded away, and we see the rock that came down hit their feet, and they were destroyed. But these beasts, their life was given to them for a Zamed and a Net, or we could say a Zaman and an Adon, or we could say a Moed and an Et. But we see the words used together once again. And then we also see Adon taken and used in 7:25. So when we get this word here, they will be given into his hand for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Those are the words Adon. Those are those words that are given to us there. So if we look at that, but we also get this word up here, we get this word times. And this is really interesting. So let's go back and let's take a look at our ESV once again. And so we're going to go down to uh, Daniel 7:25. Mm, 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 mm. All right. So he will I'll say so he shall think to change the zaman, the times, these appointed times. The word that's kind of closely associated with moed. This is not the word adon. This is that actually word zaman. So, and if when we go in and we study the situation of what he's going to do, I think this makes a lot of sense. I'm going to suggest people have asked, well, if the covenant, remember when we talked about that covenant, and it was a 7-year covenant, uh, but the time from the tamid, the sacrifice being taken away to the abomination of desolation was 1290 days, which is actually 30 days past this covenant. Well, if this little horn is trying to change appointed times or moed, maybe that plays a role into why that's different. We'll talk about that more at some future time. But it's this word, when he thinks to change zaman and law, the word Adon, they shall be given into his hand for an Adon, Adonin, and half an Adon. So this is actually tells us it'll be given in for half a time, which is really interesting because in our Daniel 12:7, it just says half. It doesn't say half of Moed or half of Moedim. It just says half. But this is the word Adon. So once again, we get this word being used together, these two words being used together. We saw it being used together in Daniel 2, and now we see it used together in Daniel 7, letting us know that we're dealing with two different things. These words are not exactly the same. So, how does that mean? Let's take a look at how zaman is used a little bit more. We saw that they're used together, but how about when is used separately? Now, Adon's used multiple other times, but these were the most important ones that I wanted to show. I'm not going to go through every single one because I don't want to go 2 hours and 15 minutes again. All right. I don't think that's necessary. Let's go back into Daniel 2, and this time we're going to be in Daniel 2:16. Then Arioch explained the matter to Daniel, and Daniel went and requested from the king that he would be given time, and he would tell the king the explanation. So he went to make an appointment with the king. So he went in and requested from the king that he would be given time. He'd be given an appointment where he could go and make a request and would tell the king the explanation. So this is different. That now he's not just giving some time. He wants an appointment. Hey man, let's get together on Tuesday at noon and we'll discuss this matter. That's what he was doing. Then Daniel went to his home and he made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Um, So so he went to make an appointment and then he went home. He didn't stop right then and there and talk to the king. Can you just go to the king and say, "Hey, king, yeah, I need some time right now. We're gonna talk, man. Yeah, yeah, you're gonna talk to me." No, no, no. You go to the president. You go to the king. You go to the CEO. I need to make an appointment, please, because I need to talk to you. I know you're very important, busy. And they'll go, Let me look at my calendar. Yeah, sometime in the next century should be okay. No, but so they made an appointment. And then we also saw it in Daniel 12:21, and we already saw that that he changes times and seasons. So this could be appointed times. So he changes times and appointed times and seasons are appointed times. If we're looking at the seasons, again, they come in time. Let's also look at Daniel 6:10. And that one popped up the wrong place. You do that to me. There we go. All right. Now, when Daniel realized that the document was signed, he went to his house. Now he had windows open in Jerusalem, and he in 3 times daily for God, just as he'd been doing previously. Nebuchadnezzar. This is the one where he had old statue, right? And he wanted people to come and pray to that big old statue. And Daniel's like, not doing it. Nope, not going to do it. But look, Nebuchadnezzar signed the document. Nebuchadnezzar did it. He signed it. Daniel had tried to dissuade him, say, "Don't do this," but he signed the document. And then Daniel went to his house in his upper rooms, and 3 times daily. This is Zamen. 3 times, 3 Zamen, 3 appointed times daily. Daniel had 3 set times that he went and prayed every single day. They were appointed times. They weren't just random times for Daniel. He had appointed times. This is that word, Zamen. Then, if we skip down into verse 13, we'll see that word used again. All right. Then these men came as a group. They found Daniel praying and pleading mercy before his God. Then they approached and spoke with the king concerning the edict of the king. Did you not sign an edict that any person who would seek anything from any god or human within 30 days, except from you, O king, would be thrown into the lion pit? Right? The king answered and said, as a matter you've just stated is certain according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they responded and said before the king, Daniel, who is from the exiles of Judah, is not paying attention to you, O king. He doesn't trust you. He doesn't believe you. He doesn't think you're worthy of worship, or to the decree that you have signed. And 3 times daily he says his prayer. And 3 Zamen daily he says his prayer. So once again, this appointed time, this time that Daniel's going up. So Zamen has this idea of an appointment, a set time, whereas Adon is just a time indistinguishable. Now, let's see. I have a graph somewhere else down there. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So that's the word Adon and Zaman, just so we have an idea of the word that we're dealing with. Now, we've already covered pretty well. I'm just going to go back into Daniel 12:1. Let's look at Daniel 8:17. That's what we looked at last week, just so you can see this word et. And he came beside where I was standing, and when I came, became terrified, and I fell prostrate on my face. And he said to me, "Understand, son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end." This is that word et ketz, time of the end. Okay, it's not an appointed time, just the time of the end is an indefinite time period. Then we also see in Daniel 12 that we just read today. Now, this word et is used multiple times just in Daniel 12:1. Now, at that time, at that et, Michael, the great prince, will arise, the protector of the sons of your people. And it will be a time, an et, of distress that has not been since your people have been a nation until that until that time. And at that time, your people will escape. So again, there's just this word et. We looked at it previously. It's a word time period without reference to anything special. Without other time, this word et really doesn't give us much information. It's just at that time, your people will be in distress. Now, Moed is a little bit different. Now let's take a look. We touched on it a little bit last week. I want to touch on it again today. Daniel 8:19. So we just looked at Daniel 8:17. Now let's take a look at Daniel 8:19. So they became terrified and prostrate. He said, "Look at the vision. It's time for the end." And when he spoke with me, I fell into a trance and my face was to the ground. And he touched me and he made me stand on my feet. And he said, "Look, I am making known to you what will happen in the period of wrath. For it refers to the moed, appointed time of the end." There is a time of the end, and there is an appointed time of the end. Appointed. They're going to happen. Look, it will happen to you in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time, the moed of the end. Now, this word et and moed are also used together, just like we saw with Adon and Zaman. And we see this in Daniel 11:35. So, Daniel 11:35, and it this is that situation where we're talking about that led up to the abomination of desolation that we got from Matthew 24:15. So we get these in verse 31, we get military forces from him will occupy and profane the sanctuary stronghold, and they will abolish the regular burnt offering. They will abolish that regular burnt offering, and they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. Okay, so this is that period of the end. And those who violate the covenant, he will seduce with flattery, but the persons who know their God will stand firm and take action. And those who have insight will instruct many, but they will fall by sword and flame, by captivity and by plunder for some time. And when they fall, they will receive a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. And even some of those who have insight will fall in order for them to be refined by it. So some will have insight will fall, just like we saw in Daniel 7, right? The holy ones will be trampled upon, and the little horn will prevail over them. So even some who have insight will fall in order for them to be refined by it and to be purified and cleansed until the time of the end. So this is the word at. This is why I like this translation a little bit better, because they're used together and they help you to separate it. And they'll be cleansed until the time of the end, the et ketz, for the appointed time, the moed is still to come. The moed is still to come. They're letting us know that that appointed time is still to come. When the people are getting trampled upon, the appointed time is still to come. What are those appointed times? That's what we need to try to understand and have a concept of, these appointed times. And in Daniel 12:7, the other place that moed is used, we find, and I heard a man who was clothed in linen above the water of the stream, and he raised his right hand. I'm challenged. Right hand, because I'm looking at the screen. I want to raise this one because on this side looks like it's right? So the right hand and the left. And he raised his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and he swore by the one who lives forever that an appointed time, a moed, a moedim, and a half. There's this. A moed, a moedim, and a half pass when the shattering of the power of the holy people would be completed, and then all these things will be accomplished. Remember, the people, the holy people, are getting trampled upon. And in Daniel 7:25, it's for a time, times, and half a time. An Adon, Adonim, and half an Adon. And they're going to be prevailed upon. But in this situation, that the end that he's asking about would be for a moed, a moedim, when the shattering of the power of the holy people would be completed. They might be the same thing, but given the context, they might be something different. And we're going to look at that here a little bit more. So that helps us to understand the word time, of how it's used in Daniel 2-7, and how it's used differently in Daniel 8-12, and why we might be dealing with things a little bit different. All right. So, and here's just kind of a reference to these words, right? At the appointed times, and then they're used together, just everything I just covered. So, question again, how long until the end of these wonders? I changed it. I added the words. So that's what I did differently. That's why this slide. It's moed, moedim, and half. And here is he's going to make alterations in times, zamanin, and time, adon, adonin, and half an adon. So this is what's going to happen. So we have another reference. Let's take a look at the clear reference we have in Revelation 12:14. In Revelation 12:14, this might be a little bit small. Let's go to our Bible. Let's go to the references up here. Should be a little bit bigger. Is that big enough? I don't know. Let's make it one more. Look bigger on the screen. Let's make it one more big. There we go. All right. Verse 14. 12, Revelation 12:14. And two wings of a great eagle were given to the woman in order that she could fly into the wilderness, for to her place where she is fed for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And so, for people that do Bible prophecy, presence of the serpent, we're going to say that that is the little horn. It is the one that's coming out of that kingdom. Um, well, let me just lay that aside for a moment. We'll look at that a little bit more closely. All right. But the woman is then able to flee into the wilderness where she is fed, where she's nourished, protected for a time, times, and half a time. All right. Now, why do we think that that is the same thing as Daniel 7:25? So if we look at this, Daniel 7:25, we see he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will tend to make alterations in times, the Zaman, and the law, and they will be given into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Well, in this one, in Revelation 12:14, the woman, and we're going to read about who this woman is, and it's basically Israel, and we're going to see that here in a second. She flies into the wilderness where she is fed or protected from the presence for a time, times, and half a time. Well, once again, we need to look at context. Context is really important in understanding Bible prophecy. So let us take a look here. Let us look at things that we think that why it supports that, and we're going to look at this context. All right, so let us go into, we'll start in Revelation 12 to understand our context. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and the head a crown of 12 stars. We're not going to cover all of this. We're going to point out to who we need. We want to know if we can understand who the woman is. That's the main point of what we're reading this context in. Just so we can support the assertion that it's Israel, we need to understand this context. Right now, who was pregnant? So this woman was pregnant and was crying out because she was having birth pains and was in torment to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 horns and 7 heads and 10 horns. 10 horns. That sounds familiar. And in his head were 7 royal diadems, but there weren't 7 heads. There were 10 horns. Well, maybe we get the 7 heads somewhere else, but we get 10 horns. So that sounds familiar, like Daniel 7:25 or Daniel 7 context. And on his heads were 7 royal headbands, and his tail swept away a third of the stars from heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth. Okay, the woman's going to give birth in order when she gave birth to a child, he could devour it. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who's going to shepherd all the nations with iron rod. Oh, yeah, we know who that is, right? If we looked at our previous studies, we know that that's associated to Daniel 7:25. The child was snatched away to God and his throne. There's only been 3 people that snatched away to God into his throne. It's probably not Enoch. It's probably not Elijah. We're looking at Jesus. Now, the woman fled into the wilderness. Okay. So she fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared there for God so she could feed her there for 1,260 days. Oh, okay. So now the woman fled into the wilderness where she could be nourished, prepared by God, so they could feed her, nourish her for 1,260 days. Okay. That sounds very similar to what we just read. Oh, there we go. And there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And they did not prevail, nor was place found for them in heaven. I'm going to skip through some of this because it doesn't really pertain. Okay. And it talks about the dragon getting thrown down. Okay. And then they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, they did not love their lives until death. So the dragon gets thrown down to earth. The people who conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, by the blood of Jesus Christ, but they still got killed. So these people rose up, kind of sounds like what we have going on that we read about in Daniel 11, that the people, the holy people who knew their God would rise up, but some of them would be killed. It tells us that. So they rose up conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, and they did not love their lives until death. Because of this, rejoice, you heavens, and those who live on them. And woe to you, earth and to sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great anger, and he knows that he has a little time. This also hints back to he knows that he has a little time. Isn't that what we were talking about in Daniel 7? That this beast that rose up, this little horn that came out of the beast, when the kingdom was given to the saints, the beast was disposed of. He was thrown into this lake, into the fire, and he was judged. So he knows that he only has a little time. So this is all sounding very reminiscent of Daniel 7:25, Daniel 11. These should be striking some chords with us. Striking some chords. I'm not really musical. Um, these should be giving us memories of TV shows that we like or movies. I wish I was musical. I've tried to play piano, not very good at it. All right, so we're almost to Revelation 12:14. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had been given birth to the male child. So he pursued this woman. So this woman that gave birth, so Israel, and with the wings of two great eagles were given to the woman in order that she could fly into the wilderness to a place where she is fed for a time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. I think the reason that this is being given in this way, and when we go back and look at Daniel and look at Revelation and the structure of Revelation, is because they want us to look back into Daniel 7, but they also want us to know how long this is going to be for. We think that time, times, and half a time is 1260 days exactly because of what we just read in Revelation 12:6, because of what we just read where it says 1260 days. And I think it'll make sense when we look at the structure. But there's some other hints that this is also 3.5 years in the book of Daniel, and we'll look at that here momentarily. All right, and from his mouth the serpent spouted water like a river after the woman, in order that he could make her swept away by a river. But the earth came to the aid of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon spouted out of his mouth. And the dragon was angry with the woman and went to fight against the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And okay, so we see that after the woman flees and the earth helps the woman, that helps Israel, goes to make war with the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. It goes to make war with the Christians. It goes to make war with people that believe in Yahovah and keep the commandments, of God, and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So if we were to look at why we think that these are associated, we see that there is this idea in Daniel 7 of a dragon, and then there is a serpent here, and that's also called a dragon in Revelation 12. There's 10 horns in Daniel 7. There's 10 horns in Revelation 12:13. Where out the holy ones, um, and he gives pursuit to the woman, but he also fights with those who follow Jesus. So this holy one here is generic enough that it allows for Christians. And that's why I like the fact that Daniel 7 uses holy ones. And you'll see that the Bible does this frequently. I think when in Daniel 7, we see that this little horn will speak words against the Most High. And in Revelation 12, he also blasphemes God. Now, I didn't give a little bit more. So we're also going to, so I think that's why we're dealing with this association here. And I think this times, and half a times is specifically helping us to associate the two. So when we asked, where is our hook of Matthew, hook of Daniel that ties us into the. I think this is the first one. This is number one. All we've done this is just going by the words of Jesus. Now I think we're going to find more hooks into Revelation that we see in um, Matthew 24, 15 through 30 or whatever. But this is the first one um, that ties it in. And is the question is this going to be the Great Tribulation? Now we also see this support if we continue just in Revelation 13. It says, and I saw a beast. I saw coming out of the sea a beast, out of the sea a beast that has 10 horns and 7 heads. The 7 heads lets us associate it with one other heads, but the 10 horns lets us really know that we're dealing with part of it is Daniel 7. And on its horns were 10 royal headbands, and on its heads a blasphemous name. And the beast I saw was similar to a leopard, and its feet were like a bear, and its mouth was like a lion. And the dragon gave it its power and its throne and great authority. Well, that's interesting. Similar to a leopard and a bear, and its mouth was like the one of a lion. Well, let's take a look. That sounds really familiar. Let's go back into our Daniel. We read that there were 4 beasts coming out of the sea, similar language. And the first one was like a lion, and right? And then look, a second one was like a bear. And after this, I was looking at a beast that had like a leopard. Exact same language here, same words and ideas that's letting us know and tying this in to um, Daniel 7, that Revelation 12 and 13 are tying us in to Daniel 7. This lets us know that we're tying it. Look. And then the beast I saw, we saw that. And on one of its heads appeared as though slaughtered to death, and its fatal wound had been healed. And the whole earth was astonished and followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to make war? And a mouth was given to him, speaking great things and blasphemies, and authority was given to act to him for 42 months. So again, we get this other reference to 42 months, 1,260 days, times, and half a time. All sounds like those are starting to tie together. But again, more information is going to be needed. We're going to have to really study this. Remember how when we were in Daniel 12, and I'm like, we were talking about abomination of desolation? And I'm like, oh, we just ran into this phrase times, and half time. We're going to have to set that aside because it's not directly referring to the abomination of desolation. And I said, we're going to come back to it. Well, now we get more time factors. And so we're going to have to come back to those. So we're talking about times, and half a time. But now we're going to have to come back and see, are those really associated? Are those other times? So I think those are the reasons that we are being supported and why these things are associated. Now, so how much time is Daniel 7:25? How much time is times, and half a time? Well, we get already from Revelation 12:6 that there's a mention of 1,260 days. We get a mention in Revelation 13 that it's 42 months. These two are the same amount. So are these the same things? We're going to look at that when we look at this more depth. In Matthew 24:15, when we look at the Great Tribulation, that time period is undefined. So let's take a quick look at Matthew 24:15 and 16. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, right? So this woman, the abomination of desolation is coming to persecute the woman, and they are to flee where they'll be nourished for times, and half a time, or 42 months, or so remember the dragon's given authority for 42 months. The woman flees for times, and half a times into a wilderness where she'll be nourished. So we get this, and there's another one that says that she'll flee into the wilderness for 1,260 days where she'll be nourished. These are starting to sound very familiar, very similar. But in Daniel, this fleeing, and you go down here and you see that there's going to be a great tribulation. It doesn't tell us a time frame. It doesn't give us time here. But by referencing Daniel and going back into Daniel and doing our homework, we're starting to make these associations that maybe these are talking about the same thing. And then the really interesting one I thought is Daniel 4:29 through 33. So I want to go through and read Daniel 4:29 through 33. All right, so let us get over here. Let's do that. And we'll scroll down. So the situation here is the king, Nebuchadnezzar, has been lifting up himself to heaven, and he make himself great. And these group, the watchers, some angels, make a pronouncement and a judgment against him that he will have a mind like a beast, and so he's going to have this mind like a beast. And we get this word, the words Adon, that we've been talking about. All right. So we find out that the king saw a watcher, a holy one coming down from heaven. And he said, cut down the tree and destroy it, but the stump of its root in the earth leave with a band of iron and bronze, grass of the field, and let it be watered with dew of heaven, and let his lot be with animal of the field until 7 Adon, 7 times have passed over him. So we're getting this information that this 7 periods of time are going to be given to Nebuchadnezzar, that he's going to be cut down, he's going to be crazy, he's going to be with the wild animals. Now we see this again in verse 25. He will be driven away from human society, where he'll dwell with the animals in the field and cause them to raise like the oxen itself, and you'll be watered with the dews of heaven. 7 Adon, 7 periods of time will pass over to you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of humankind. And to whom he wills, he gives it. So this is what they want Nebuchadnezzar to realize. 7 periods of time, 7 Adon. Now, therefore, O king, so then Daniel gives him the interpretation. He tells him, look, therefore, O my king, let my advice be acceptable to you, and your sin to remove with righteousness and your iniquity, and having mercy on the oppressed, in case there might be a prolongation of your prosperity. Daniel basically told him the interpretation. This is what you need to do. You need to repent. You need to say and acknowledge the Most High of heaven. But what happens to Nebuchadnezzar? All this happened to Nebuchadnezzar the king. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. So 12 months have passed, a whole year, this whole year period of time. And the king answered and said, is this not great Babylon, which I have built as a royal palace by the strength of my own power and for the glory of my own majesty? So Daniel told him about this. But for 12 months, the king has not said it. He's not repented. He's not said the God of heaven is the one to receive glory. Nebuchadnezzar has kept it for himself, and at the end of 12 months, he still is saying these things. He's still boastful. He's still lifting up his head, and he's walking saying, look what I've done. Behold my majesty. While the words were still in his mouth, the voice from heaven came saying, to you, King Nebuchadnezzar, is declared that the kingdom has departed. I need some water. Yeah, okay. To you, King Nebuchadnezzar, it is declared that the kingdom has departed from you, and you will be driven away from human society, and your dwelling will be with the animals of the field, and they will cause you to graze the grass like oxen. And 7 Adon will pass over you until you acknowledge the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of humankind, and he gives it to whom he wills. Verse 33. Immediately, the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar, and he was expelled from human society, and he ate grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven until his hair was like the hair of an eagle, and his nails grew like birds' claws. But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, reason returned to me. So it was seven periods of time. We don't know what those periods are. Maybe they because he had 12 months to say and happen. We don't know. I just find that interesting. So maybe that Adon was giving us the idea that an Adon was a year. In that situation, it would be times two times, which would be 3.5, maybe. I don't know. But I just found that interesting. But Revelation 6:12:6 and Revelation 13:5 suggest to us that it's probably 3.5 years. This is just maybe further support that it's 3.5 years. Interesting. Maybe that's the time that the beast, the serpent, the dragon has to acknowledge the King of Heaven and repent and say it's your kingdom. And maybe it's a hint and back to Nebuchadnezzar that he's been thrown down to the grass and been cut down and he's confined on earth. And that association, I don't know. Very interesting, though. I find the association very interesting, which is why I put it there. Okay, so how much time is Daniel 7:25? Times and a half time? Not completely clear. Really suggestive. 42 months, 1,260 days. We're going to have to dig into it further, and we will, but not today. So, needs further study. I think this is either one or two time frames is most likely, and based on how the Book of Revelation is structured, it either falls into one or the other, or both of these and the other and Daniel 7:25 are talking about the same thing. It's either one, and so there's two different time frames, or they're all one thing, and we'll study it when we get closer. I think that they're all one, um, but again, we want to study it more further. And honestly, I have not studied that. I've been really struggling with understanding Revelation 12 and 13. I probably have read that in the last year that I've been studying Revelation or studying prophecy, um, at least 10 times, at least. I don't want to give a lot of hyperbole, but I keep reading it over and over and over because the structure of Revelation is one of the most challenging things, and there's a lot of debate. How does it fit together? And I really think I'm close to figuring it out. I've watched so many videos, um, read so many commentaries and books. I think, but we'll get to it when we study Revelation. All right, so it needs further study. But so it is either during this 1,260 days or during the time that Tamid is taken away up to the abomination of desolation, or it's during this great tribulation after the abomination of desolation. So those are the time frames we're looking at. So bringing us back, how long till the end of these wonders? Um, these are probably the same time periods. All right, now the standard interpretation. Let's see, where is my classic time plane? Yes, all right. Where I just want you to see where I was on my slides. I am hour and 15 minutes in. Ooh, I'm over halfway done. We don't have much time left. Yay. Not yay. I mean, I enjoy it, but I don't want people to be here forever like last time. The classic and standard interpretation, we've talked about this before, is that the daily sacrifice and the abomination of desolation occur exactly at the same time. In that type of scenario, the times, and half a times, the 42 months and the 1,260 days would all pretty much be happening at the same time. The 1,290 days overlaps and the 1,335 days overlaps, which is also why people have had problems fitting in the 2,300 days. That's why some people have said the 2,300 days had to start from the beginning of the covenant here so that and that it ends somewhere in here because of that. But again, I don't think that these two come together. I really think that these two are separated based on Daniel 12:11. All right. Now, now the question comes in is Daniel 12:7. Have we misplaced Daniel 12:7? That times, and half a times. But if you look at that, Daniel 12:7, basically you still have, 75 days that's still going on after that time. And they've made a lot of theories of, oh, um, that's just, that's 7 days. That's because that's the blessing. And they speculate about all that's going to happen during these 75 days. Um, and but if you look at the context of the question of Daniel 12:7, so the context is, and the question is, how long until the end of these wonders? So we want to be some end. And the response is, it's for an Moed, a Moedim, and half. And the issue is, in the context of Daniel 12, is that Michael's rising up. This context is all about the people. When is the end for the people? When is the end of this time for the people? Daniel 11:31 through 45, 44 was about the enemy and the conflicts and the battle. But Daniel 12, the context is really for the people. So the question is have we misplaced Daniel 12:7? And I think most people have. And let me show you why. Let me show you again why. Daniel 12:7 says, I heard the man who was clothed in linen, who was above the water of the stream, and he raised his right hand and his left hand into heaven, and he swore by the one who lives forever and ever, that a Moed, a Moedim, and a half. And then the end of the end of those things for the people. Let's look at Revelation 10, 5 and 6. Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by the one who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the seas and the things in it. There will be no more delay. There will be no more time. That word there is actually, that delay is actually the word time, and we'll look at that here in a second. I'm going to suggest that Daniel 12:7 is actually a reference to Revelation 10, 5, and 6. And let me prove to you or show you why I think that's the case. I think this is one of the best hooks into the book of Revelation that gives us a very definite time period. And I think Jesus was referencing these things and wanted us to look, and this gives us one of the first references there. It has to do with this phrase, he raised his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and he swore by the one who lives forever and ever. It has to do with this phraseology. That phraseology is found nowhere else in the Bible. I can't find that phrase in the Bible. Now, people are going to argue that Revelation 10:5 does not have the word and left hand. And I'm going to show you why. We'll look at that. But it mentions time, times, and half a time. It's Moed, Moedim. And I think it's the time that Jesus returns to earth. Remember in Daniel 12:7, the man is above the waters, the man in linen, and he's above the waters. And he tells them these things. But in Revelation 10, the man is standing on the land. He has a foot on the sea and he has a foot on the land. So he's actually on the ground. And he raises his hands to heaven and he swears by the one who lives forever and ever. And then so I think that this is that reference. Now let's take a look at what that would do. What that would mean is that the return of Jesus would be after the sixth trumpet down here. and before the seventh trumpet, right there. That's what that would mean. Um, and in context of the gathering of the elect and other things, I think that makes so much sense. And we're gonna really look at that here more closely. But this would be the implication, right? Here's our abomination of desolation. Here's the removal of the sacrifice, the tamid. Here would be the great tribulation that would be occurring here. This would be 1335 days. And when Jesus returns, there would be some time here. And I'm going to show you how that time ends and works. All right, so let's look a little bit more closely. That's the graph. Now we're going to look at our comparison. All right, so number one, we get this idea of that he raises his right and left hand. And in Revelation, oh, did I put wrong one? I did. That should be 10. Oh, I see. I got so focused on 12. That should be Revelation 10. He raises his right hand. Here, again, he's above the water of the stream, and he places his foot on the sea and on the left hand on the land. He swears by him who lives forever and ever. He swears by him who lives with that forever and ever. Here it's for a times, and half a time. And here there will be no more time, no more delay. It's not for times. There's no more delay, no more time. This is associated with the shattering of the holy people. So it comes after the shattering of the holy people. And this one's associated with the seventh trumpet and the mystery of God. Now, I want to show in comparison this. Yeah, okay, that's where we want to be. Now, remember how I said that there's no real association of raising the right hand and the left hand to heaven. I want to show you a couple of associations with this idea of raising hands. The first one I want to show you is Isaiah 45, 11 through 13. Thus says Jehovah, the Holy One of Israel, and its maker. So we say Jehovah and the Holy One and its maker. Ask me of the things to come about my children, and you command me about the work of my hands. I myself made the earth, and I created humankind upon it. And I, my hands, stretched out the heavens, and I commanded all their host. So this idea of hands and raising hands, this idea of stretching out. So my hands commanded, stretched out. This is why I'm getting these associations. I myself have stirred him up in righteousness, and I will make all his paths smooth. He himself shall build my city, and he shall set my exiles free. So again, just these references that we're talking about, that he'll build his city, this millennial kingdom. He'll set the exiles free. He'll set the exiles of Israel, of his holy ones, free. Look at Isaiah 8:48, 12 and 16. Listen to me, Jacob, and Israel, whom I've called. I am he. I am the first. I'm also the last. This is direct information into and tie into Revelation 21, 22 that we looked at last week. I'm the first and the last. Indeed, my hand founded the earth, and my right hand spread out the heavens. So his right hand spread out the heavens. I will summon them. They stand in position together. Assemble all of you in here. Who among them declare these things? Yahovah loves him, and he shall perform his wish against Babylon. Excuse me. Okay, so this is reference to the hands. Remember how I talked to raise the hands to heaven? There's no direct reference. This is the best one that we have attestation to, and I find this one very interesting. This is Deuteronomy 32, 40 through 43. For indeed, I lifted up my hands to heaven, and I promise, as I live forever, when I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold of it in judgment, I will take reprisals against my foes, and my haters I will repay. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword will devour flesh with the blood of the slain, and captives from the heads of the leaders of the enemy. Call for songs of joy, O nations, concerning his people, for the blood of his servants, he will, it keeps jumping down. Okay, let's get this right. And he will take reprisals against his foes, and he will make atonement for his land and his people. So this is God speaking. When we read this in Deuteronomy 40 through 43, this is God speaking. So he lifts up his hand to heaven. I lift up my hand to heaven, and I promise as I live forever, when I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold of it in judgment. This gives us this picture. If we go back here, when Jesus returns, look, he holds up his hands to heaven. He swears by him who lives forever and ever when he takes hold of his sharpened sword in times of judgment. And we talk about this being here, that's going to be for time, that there's going to be a year of redemption and a year of recompense, that he's going to take hold of judgment. And at the end of the time, there's going to be judgment against the beast. I think that this is flashing and giving a picture of that. It's not a direct, exact quote. It doesn't say hands to heaven. It doesn't say right hand and left hand. Um, and it says, I lift up my hand to heaven and I promise as I live forever and ever, which is also just really interesting because this is God speaking, saying, and he's giving an idea that he can raise his hands to heaven. I really think this is pointing towards Jesus, and it points towards this man in linen that's above the waters, but at the other time, he's actually on the land, on the sea, and he lifts his hand, his right hand to heaven. So I think this is very interesting. I think Deuteronomy 40 through 43 is applying and talking about Daniel 12:7, and I think it's also talking about Revelation 12:5. I'm sorry, Revelation 10:5. Um, so that's this idea of raise, and that's the only other context of hands being raised or spreading something out. Now, other comparisons. This idea of humans. Let's take a look at Genesis 14:22. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to Yahovah, God Most High, maker of heaven and earth. So I wanted to point out that people do also raise their hands to heaven. It's not just God himself that raised his hands to heaven and swears. And so, look, I've raised my hand to heaven, maker of heaven and earth. And then he makes a swear. He promises that neither thread nor a thong of your sandal will I take from all that belong to you. So Abram does that and raises his hands to heaven. We see in Exodus 9:22, and Yahovah said to Moses, stretch out your hands to heaven and let there be hail in the land of Egypt and on human and animal. So this is God's telling Moses to stretch out his hands to heaven, and so that he's going to make a promise that these things are going to be done. These judgments will be done on people. But it's really interesting in this one because I think that this is also hinting at some of the bowl judgments that we may be dealing with. So I find that one actually very interesting. Exodus 10:21. Then Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the heavens, so there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, and a person can feel darkness. One of the bowl judgments is there's going to be darkness on the land. So again, I just find that very interesting. When we look at the bowl judgments, we'll probably be back in here as well. 1 Kings 8:21 and 22. I have provided a place there for the ark, in which the covenant which Jehovah made with our ancestors when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Then Solomon stood before the altar of Jehovah in the presence of all the assembly of Israel. He spread out his hands to the heavens and said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no God like you in the heavens above or in the heavens above or on the earth beneath, keeping the covenant and the loyal love for your servants who are walking before you with all their heart. So just another instance of somebody lifting their hands and swearing by the God of heaven. So I don't want people to be left with some thing I'm saying that there's no references to this. I'm just saying that there's no direct reference to raises the right hand and the left hand and swears by the God of heaven. What I want to show is that the people raise their hands or they raise a hand towards heaven and swears by the God of heaven or the one who lives forever and ever. So even though it's, I think, very compelling, I don't think that that is complete proof that this is the return of Jesus. But I think it's enough that it gets us interested. And I'm going to show why I still think there's even more evidence about this. But um, I wanted to be honest with how I'm approaching the biblical text, um, to show some of the counter arguments that people would have and say, no, that this might not be that return. But I think what it is I think it's enough to make us go, and look at it more closely. And I'm going to show you even more information in the coming weeks. All right. 1 Samuel 28:10. Then Saul swore to her by Jehovah, as Yahweh lives, you will not be punished for this thing. Okay. So just again, not raising the hands, but he swore by Yahweh and he's saying as he lives. So he's using that formula as Yahweh lives, you will not be punished. Jeremiah 38:16. So Zedekiah the king swore to Jeremiah in secret, saying, as Yahweh lives, who has made for us this life, I will not kill you. Right. So again, he's swearing by as Yahweh lives. So the other ones were raising hands. These were swearing by as Yahweh lives. Jeremiah 4:2. And you swear as Yahweh lives in truth, in justice, and in righteousness. Then nations will be blessed by him, and in him they will boast. So again, just one word that people swear by these things. All right. So now let me show you one thing that I found very interesting. This is this idea. This is this is a Cochin, India. This is a Hebrew revelation. This was found in Cochin, India. I suggest you go take a look at it. It's very interesting. You can actually buy a copy, and I bought a copy. And in this Hebrew version, um, the words read, and the messenger or the angel who was standing on the sea and on the dry land, whom I have seen, lifted up his right hand and his left hand unto the heavens, and he swore by the ever living. So this one actually has the words and his left hand. Now the question is does it matter, number one, that the angel in 10:5 lifts up both hands or just one hand? Does that really make a difference? Now, if it's a direct quote from Daniel 12:7, probably. So the question would be, did it get added or did it get dropped? Did somebody recognize that maybe this was a very similar phraseology and so added left hand? Or was it originally there and it got dropped? Well, that's really interesting. I'm not sure. We don't really have a lot of other attestations. Now, I looked as much as I can find. I need to do more research. There's three primary types of biblical manuscripts. There's what's called the Alexandrian type, the Western type, and the Byzantine type. The oldest one I could find that has, so a lot of them don't have Revelation 10:5. It's really interesting. A lot of them, there's a lot that don't have Revelation 10:5. Of the Alexandrian type, the earliest one is P47, which is the Chester Beatty Papyrus, only has right. It is also a reference to Sinaiticus, which is one of the earliest complete. So that's an Alexandrian type, and they also only has right, which doesn't surprise me because they're of the same type. What I need to find, and if anyone is out there is interested, I need to find the Western type and the Byzantine type to see if there's any early references, if any of them say anything different. So that would actually be something very interesting to me, and I will research that as time allows. But I just found this very interesting that the Cochin Hebrew has right and left hand. And I think if that winds up being the case and that's actually true, I think then that's pretty much a slam dunk that is referring to Daniel 12:7. Otherwise, if it's just right hand, I don't think it precludes it, because of the other references that are out there of lifting hands and swearing by him who lives forever and swearing by as Yahweh lives. But it doesn't, it still doesn't mean that um, it can be, it couldn't be. But I think there's even more. I think what this reference does is it gets us into the text of Revelation that then gives us even more information of why that is the case, why this is Jesus returning. And these are the other biblical references why I think it's Jesus returning. Okay, so this is where we're going to be at. Let's look at the rest of Revelation 10. Um, okay. And I saw another powerful angel descending from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, and a rainbow over his head. And his face was like the sun, and his feet were like pillars of fire. And holding in his hand a little scroll that was open. And he put his right foot on the sea and his left on the land. And he cried out with a loud voice like a lion roars. And when he cried out, the seven thunders sounded their own voices. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up the things which the seven thunders spoke and don't write them. And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things that are in it, there will be no more delay, there will be no more time. But in the days of the sound of the seventh angel, which he is about to blow the trumpet, then the mystery of God, which is completed, as he announced to his own slaves, the prophets. We just read in Isaiah about the ones lifting their hands and spreading out the heavens that created everything. Again, it harkens to this. But I think there's even more references here. We read in Daniel 7, when one like a son of man, he was coming on the clouds. That's one of the first things that we see, that this person is wrapped in a cloud as he's coming down. It references the Mosaic covenant. It references Jesus saying when he returns, he's going to come on the clouds of heaven. And we're going to study this. We're going to look at this. I think that's it. Powerful angel. There's multiple times that there's the angel of the Lord, angel of Jehovah, that's mentioned in the Old Testament. That doesn't preclude this being Jesus, because it's a messenger, it's an angel. I don't think it precludes it. There's a rainbow over his head. This is a Noahic covenant reference. It's also a reference to the beginning in the book of Revelation, where when he's on the throne of God, there's a rainbow over him. His face was like the sun. That's only a reference to God. No angel says that they have a face like the sun. Feet like pillars of fire. Holding an open little scroll. There's definitely some references there in regards to the early book of Revelation and things. His voice was like the voice of a lion that roars. Okay, again, reference to this lion of tribe of Judah. The seven thunders sounded. Okay, that is a reference back to the Mount of with Moses and God speaking. It's a reference into the New Testament when a voice comes from heaven and people say that sounded like thunder sounded. There's multiple references to that. And then also eating the scroll. There's some references back into Ezekiel related to that. The seven thunders is also really interesting that he talks about that don't write the words of the seven thunder. What did the seven thunders say? There's been so much speculation about what the seven thunders said. And we're going to look into some of those speculations. But I think these 9 things combined with what we just got from Daniel 12, I think that these all are a reason why I think that this is the return of Jesus. And he puts his foot on the land and his foot on the sea, that he actually touches ground, which is different than what you see in Daniel 12, where his feet are above the waters. So I think that this is actually our hook. I think these are both our hooks into Revelation. I think these times, and half a time, both of them are hooks, and I think that they're both different. And just as the words are different. There's also a reference to time, that there'll be no more delay. And this word here that I want to look at, there will be no more delay. There's this word right here, delay.
This word is actually the only time this word is translated as delay in the New Testament is here. Every other time, this word is translated as time. Well, not every time, but the majority of them, like 43 out of 47 out of 50 sometimes. Let's see if did I put that down? Okay. So I think that this is Jesus returning here after the sixth trumpet and before the seventh trumpet. So I think that's what's going on. And then we see that. So before we do that, let's look at our time as in our references here. So I'm going to look at some of these words. So this is the word. I thought I had put that slide there. I guess I didn't. I forgot to put my question mark. All right. This is the word chronos, this word time. So this word delay here is the word chronos. So it's the Greek word chronos. It's used in Acts 1, 6 through 7. So when they come together, they began asking him, Lord, what is it at this time, at this chronos, that you will be restoring the kingdom of Israel? But he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has set by his own authority. It's not you to know the chronos, the times, or look at seasons. That gives that reference, remember, back to the appointed times that we saw when those two words were used together. It's not you to know the time set by the Father for his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. Galatians 4:4. So some people will say, oh, look, he says it's not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has set. Is it that they are not to know because they are to do these things? Again, one of the things. When we look at that statement, Jesus says no one will know the time, the day, or the hour. We're going to discuss that, and this passage will be discussed. Galatians 4. Why did you do that? You always want to. Galatians 4:4. When the fullness of time came, God sent out his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Again, time, chronos, when the fullness of chronos came. Hebrews 11:32. What more shall I say? For chronos, for time, wouldn't fail me to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets. So they just didn't have enough time, enough chronos. Acts 17:30. Therefore, God has overlooked the times, the chronos, the times of ignorance, and he has now commands all people everywhere, repent. God is telling the people, repent. If you don't know Jesus, if you do know Jesus, repent. That's what he's calling us to do. Be a people of repentance, of humbleness, not like Nebuchadnezzar. Not someone who is, look, we've built up our own world, our own land, our own mind, our own intelligence. No, repent in front of the God of heaven. Acknowledge him and his commandments. Titus 1:2. In the hope of eternal life, which God, who does not lie, promised before eternal ages, before eternal time, before chronos. This hope of eternal life, God does not lie. He promised before time, before eternal time. He set this. And if you struggle with the idea of God's sovereignty and man's free will, I did a video on that about a month or two ago. Please go back and look at that. I'm planning to do another one in the future when I have chronos, when I have time, when I have et or edon. Okay. So that's that word time. So I just find it very interesting that in Revelation 5, when we look at these things, it says there will be no more time. There will be no more chronos. There's not going to be any more. But in the days of the sounding of the seventh trumpet, when he's about to blow, then the mystery of God, which is completed, he announced to his servants. But I find that this word time here also is used as chronos, the Greek word, that, oh, you know what? I never looked that word up in the Coaching Hebrew. Oh, I should have done that. I'm going to go do that at some point, and I'll let you know what I find. and see what that word is. Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I bet it's et. I bet it's not moed. I bet it's et. Okay, but let's see. If it was moed, that would be like slam dunk. All right. So I think given all of those things, I think that's why these are the support of the return of Jesus in Revelation 10. And I think that's why this timeline is starting to take shape, and it's looking like this, and then the trumpet here, so what we're going to do, there's one of two ways that I can proceed next. I'm going to talk about that here in just a bit, and we'll talk about those two ways I can proceed. So before we do, 7, he swore by the one who lives forever and ever, so this would be the Son of Man coming here. Now, we need to look at, if we're going to understand this, we need to understand the Moedim calendar. The calendar for God, there's basically 360 days on the Moed calendar, which is different than the sacrifice calendar. Okay, so Moed calendar is a little different than the sacrifice calendar. In the Moed calendar, there are appointed times. The Moed from Leviticus 23, and you can see that those are here, and these are the feasts. Nisan 1 is considered the beginning of the year, and this is also Tishri 1 is also considered the beginning of a year. Differently, we won't get into that today. But what I want to show is the feasts, and that in the beginning of the feasts, there's these basically 75 days to Shavuot, to Pentecost. There's 75 days from the beginning here to here. Now, depending on the year, depending on when first fruits and the day after the Sabbath occur, it could be somewhere anywhere from 70 to 75 days. There's 49 days in the Feast of Weeks. There's 21 days up until the end of unleavened bread. To those together, 49 plus 21 gives us 70 days. Okay, and at the end of those 70 days, on the 15th of Sivan, is Shavuot, or Pentecost. And then depending on when first fruits happens, like I said, it could be up to 75 days. So very interesting. Then there's 105 days between the end of Shavuot until the first of Tishri, which is the Feast of Trumpets. There's 22 days in these feasts. Trumpets, Yom Kippur on the 10th, and then Sukkot, which goes for 7 days and ends on the 22nd. And then there's 158 days culminating in the 30th of Adar, the last month of the calendar year, before Nisan 1 starts again. So the spring feast covers about 75 days. The fall feast covers about 22 days. Why is that important? Now, remember what I said. At the return of Jesus, it says there will be a Moed, a Moedim, and half. And the half refers back to what just came before, which means it would be a half of a Moedim. So one full Moedim would be this. It'd be 1 full year. 1 full year. A half a Moedim would either be this or this. I mean, some people might want to try to break them up and say, oh, that's a half a Moedim. I mean, you could, but the way that they're separated really suggests that a half is going to be either the half in the front or the half in the back. A Moed would just be one. It would just be one. It would be either Passover, it might be Shavuot, it might be Sukkot. It's just one Moed. It could also refer to a Sabbath, just one Saturday. One Sabbath so a Sabbath is also called one of the Moed. So that's how that plays. Now, so what does that mean in terms of our calendar, our timeline? Oh, and if you really want to study this, you could study some of the biblical feasts. So if we're talking about a Moed, it'd be really interesting if Jesus returns. So we're right here. A Moed, I'm going to suggest, is a Pentecost, the one. The Moedim would be a whole year from starting then in the fall, trumpets, days of awe, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and then going through the spring ones, Passover, first fruits, and through Pentecost. That would then end right up until the day of the trumpets next year. So that would actually be one full Moedim. And that the half of Moedim would then just be the fall feasts. That's what I'm going to suggest. That's what I'm going to go about showing and proving as time goes on. Again, I like to give you the information ahead of time, but then I want to show you biblically why that would be the case. Then we have our 1 year of retribution and redemption that we talked about. And that 1 year, I would suggest either starts at trumpets and ends on trumpets, or starts at Yom Kippur and ends on Yom Kippur. You could slide it either way, but it's about the same time period. And I've gone back and forth on which one that year would be. I think it's probably Yom Kippur to Kippur, but it only makes a 10-day difference if it's trumpets to trumpets. And then I put in here also the times, and half a time from Daniel 7. So there you have three options. It could be the 1260 days here between the covenant made and the daily sacrifice. It could be 1260 days here after the daily sacrifice and the Tamid ending. Or it could be the times, and half a times that is here after the abomination of desolation, which could still be the case even if it's not a full 1260 days, because it's also during the Great Tribulation, which says, and if those days had not been cut short, no life would have survived. So, uh, that's actually really interesting. So I think there's three different options of when that times, and half a times from Daniel 7:25 could occur, and then how that plays a role into Revelation 12:6 and Revelation 13:5, when we get 42 months and 1260 days. So those are the things that we're going to have to look at in more depth. Okay. So if you want to understand how the Moed, these feasts of God, work, I really recommend this book, The Biblical Feast and the Return of Jesus by Travis M. Snow. And if you're not familiar with biblical feasts, there's also a couple of good websites. There's one called Olive Tree Fellowship, or it's Olive Branch Fellowship. He's a Messianic teacher. He's not originally Jewish, but he teaches a lot on the feasts. And he has multiple ones. There's this excellent ones on the wedding feast, excellent one on each of the feasts, each of the Moed, to really understand what they mean and why I am putting the structure the way that I'm putting it. To do those properly, it basically is I'd have to go through his book. I would have to go through multiple of the other teachings like this Olive Tree Fellowship does. To do that properly, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 for each one, 20 lessons to help understand all of this if you're not familiar with it. Which is why I recommend, if you're really interested, to go through. And if you do know about it, come back and drop a comment. Come back. Let's talk about it. I'm nowhere near an expert in these areas. Nowhere near. Did not grow up with it. This is all things that I'm learning, and hopefully we can learn together. But that's what the implications are. If this is the return of Jesus in Daniel 12:7 and Revelation 10:5, these are what the implications would be in my mind. And I'm willing to change. I'm not, these are not hard and set. I'm just going by what I can glean from the scriptures. And then also how the times, and half a times work in Daniel 7:25. Gives us a hook into Revelation, forces us to consider the structure of Revelation, and it gives us a hard structure as we enter Revelation. I think yeah. So this gives us this hard structure. This is all we've put together, and we haven't even touched on Revelation. I have down here the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. You can see those down here on the bottom, right? So we have these two timelines. It's really pretty amazing. We have these two timelines, and we built one timeline just based on Jesus's words from Matthew 24:15 and the abomination of desolation. We built this huge structure this huge timeline that now we can hook into the book of Revelation. And the book of Revelation, I think, gives us a line, a chronology of how things are working. And that's what we're going to be looking at. Let me see if I'm, yeah, so our next one here. So I put this a little bit more detail in here. I think that we have this resurrection rapture in this days of awe and trumpets, which would be here after the seventh trumpet. And then there's this blessing of the Holy Spirit that I think that goes along with Pentecost here, that has to do with believers that are still left, the Jewish believers, that where they get the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and that's that blessing there. If you look at the first coming, so what would happen is trumpets, days of awe, Kippur, and Sukkot would finish the um, the plan for Christians and people who have believed on Yeshua. So there would be a resurrection and a rapture here, and then there would be a marriage supper of the Lamb, that we would be taken to heaven, and we would be married to Christ. Um, and then they would finish off with this for moving into the millennial kingdom, where there would be these people that would get the Holy Spirit. And then they would go through the trumpets, days of awe, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And Sukkot would then be a picture of resting with God, of living with God, of building our tabernacle with God, um, going into the millennial kingdom. So I think so when Jesus says a moed, a moedim, and half a moed. Now that Jesus returning here, also because we don't know the day and the hour, yeah, see, I'm still going 2 hours. I'm telling you, man. Because we don't know the day and the hour, we don't know what day we know Jesus left and was taken up to heaven before Pentecost. We know that he says, days from now you will be given power and spirit by the Holy Spirit. We don't know exactly which day Jesus left, but he also says that the same way you see him go, you'll see him coming. He'll be coming in the clouds. He'll be coming from heaven. He'll be coming back just before Pentecost. So that would all fit with he's coming as in a moed, and then there would be a moedim and half a moed, half a moedim, which then would all fit that, which means that from the time Jesus comes back, there'd be about 290 days plus 75 days plus 127 days, thereabouts, which would basically be a little over a year and a half. But it would end. Remember what the question was: is when is the end of all of these things? When is the end? And this would be the end before we enter the millennial kingdom, which we're talking about. Versus on the traditional one, there's still 75 days after the end. This one would end. And the blessing, because remember, the blessing would be to the Jewish people. Most people want to put the blessing, which would be at the end on the traditional one, as entering the millennial kingdom. But the old one does not really show how it's going to work for the people that are non-spirit filled saints. So that's why I think that this is how all this plays out. So more digging, more study, but this is where we're at with everything. So what are we going to be doing next time? So where we're going to be moving, we have three different directions that we can move. We can move into the times, and half a time, which has to do with Daniel 7:25. But I don't think that's the right way to go, because we got to hook into Revelation. So we need to say, what is the structure of Revelation? We need to know, are the trumpets, seals, and bowls overlapping? Are they linear? How does that all play around? So I don't think moving into more into times, and half a time would be helpful. Related to Daniel 7:25. Now, the second issue is we also have times, and half a times that gave us a hook into Revelation, but I think it's a tentative hook. It's like little baby hooks. We just kind of like we just grasp. We're like, oh, this could be it. But as I think you saw from our study, it was not a like firm two hands claws. Oh, yes, this is definitely the hook into Revelation. So I think before we can really build our structure, we want to make sure that this is truly the hook into Revelation. Before we look at the structure of Revelation, we want to know that this is it. So we need to look at all of those other 9 references to say, yes, this is definitely the return of Jesus. It's after the 6th trumpet and before the 7th trumpet, because he even tells us, but in the time of the 7th trumpet, he's telling us that this is before the time of the 7th trumpet. So if that's going to be the case, we need to know for certainty that this is our hook. And then once we know that that's our hook, then we can look at our structure. Now, if you say, "Oh, that's enough information for me. I completely agree with you." Then we can jump into and study the structure of Revelation. And I'm tempted to do that because I've studied all the other things. I'm very confident in that assessment, but I'm doing these Bible studies for other people. I'm doing them for myself, but I'm also doing them for other people. So I don't want to just say, "Yep, believe me, trust me, yeah, yeah, just believe me. Yeah, hey, I got some land, got some snake oil, I got some other stuff I want to sell you. Ooh, 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 buy this T-shirt for me. Ooh, join my Patreon." No, no, I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for followers. I'm doing this in response to what I think is the biblical teaching based on all the things that I'm studying. And I want to prove to other people that I think that these are the correct teachings. So as because of that, I'm going to pause our timeline and we're going to hit all those other points. We're going to go back, and we're going to go back into this, and we're going to look at all of these. All of these. It's going to take some time. Each one of these is a minimum a week study on its own, which means that we're looking at almost 10 studies just on Revelation 10 alone, at least. Yeah, that's where we're going to be going. I wish we could all agree on biblical teaching. I wish we could all agree on Revelation. But I've seen so much poor teaching out there, misinformation, which is why you see what I'm doing. I'm pretty much try to stay within the Bible. I do a lot of references. I try to even show in relationship to the raising of the hands. I try to show places where going, you could come to a different conclusion, which is why we're going to do this. So yeah, wound up being almost as long as last time. That's where we're going to be going next. And that's what we're going to be doing. I'm not sure which one of those 10. I've done some of the studies, but I haven't put them into slides. I haven't put them into that structure. So yeah, I'm actually going to start a whole new file for this and call it just Revelation 10 study, because this whole slide part is just for the timeline, and so we're pausing the timeline at this point to understand the hook into Revelation. And then we'll come back and we'll look at the structure of Revelation at some point in the future, um, unless I'm feeling led to get back into the timeline. But I think with this, with these slides that I've put here, with this slide, this slide, this slide, with these slides that you see here, take pictures. I think that there's enough there that people can construct and have an idea of what those end times are going to look like. Um, I think that there's not a lot of other information in terms of the grand structure. There's a lot of more fine detail, like what's exactly going to happen during this time period, what's going to happen during this time period, what's going to happen, the sign, sun, and moon, stars, and what's going to happen during this time period during, oh, yeah, what's going to happen during this time period, during this trumpet, what's going to happen during the bowls, what's going to happen during the year of redemption, what's going to happen during the year of recompense. What are those things going to be? What's going to happen about this gathering of the elect? How does that all play in? It's all fine detail that's being filled in, but the grand structure, the grand understanding is pretty much there. Um, I'm going to suggest that the seals, trumpets, and bowls are linear um, down and through here. And as long as you keep that in mind, I think that, and you know that where this occurs, you'll be able to kind of fill in a lot of the other things. You can see here that I have the sign, sun, moon, and stars over the blue. And that's because I think that this is the sixth seal that we're dealing with there, 6. Um, and again, when we get there, I'll prove why that is, and we'll talk about this in relationship to the day of the Lord, and how that plays. There's many people who think the rapture and the resurrection are going to be during the sixth seal, and I don't think that that's correct. So, anyways, I think those are basically what we're going to be looking at. I think I'm excited. This is going to be fun. If there's anybody in chat and they have any questions or anybody wants to talk about things, drop a comment below. Throw something in the comments. But otherwise, I'm going to be pretty much done with this lesson today. Because we're switching topics and I wasn't really sure where I was going to be going next. I've just been praying about it. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to be able to get the next study done. I wasn't even sure I was going to get this one done. I'm not sure if I'm going to have enough time to get the next one done by next week. As you see, I didn't put my link up until pretty much this morning because I wasn't sure if I was going to actually make it because there was so much. I thought I was shorter, but yeah. Anyways, let's see what we got here. All right. So there could be some of you who would normally be here that aren't here. Yep. All right. So a lot of this, there's no one in the chat. So wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Once again, I'm Colon Wright. Be blessed. Trust in Jesus. Trust in Yeshua. Trust in Yahweh, Lord our God. Peace. Shalom, shalom.